1885, Tokyo. The city lay under a veil of darkness, every narrow street trembling with whispered fears. One man, known only as the executioner, moved unseen. Yet his presence was felt in every shadow, in every heartbeat that faltered at night. His hands were stained not with regret, but with devotion to a ritual no one dared question. He collected the tears of his victims, each drop a trophy of anguish, a record of despair meticulously preserved. Doors bolted when he approached, and even the bravest avoided the alleys rumored to echo with the remnants of his cruelty. Children trembled at stories whispered under blankets. Mothers prayed in silence, and merchants spoke in hushed tones of the man who could sense fear before it surfaced. Every execution was a performance, precise and unyielding, transforming agony into a collection of sorrow that he alone could interpret. Eyes wide with terror, victims begged for mercy that would never come. He watched, observing every tremor, every gasp, every tear, storing them as though they were precious jewels. His mansion, far from the city's heart, was a shrine to despair. Each room filled with jars reflecting candlelight, each jar a silent testament to lives stolen. Travelers passing nearby claimed to hear cries carried by the wind, voices that no one could confirm, whispers that seemed to linger long after they had left. In his mind, these tears were more than emotion. They were a currency of power, an archive of human fragility that he could possess, control, and understand. Tokyo became a map of terror under his watch. Every alley, every dark corner a vein through which fear pulsed like blood. Even the law feared him, unable to predict his methods, his precision, his obsession. Rumors spread, stories of doors slamming, shadows moving without source, cries echoing in empty alleys, all attributed to his unseen hand. Each night he prowled silently, cataloging terror, converting sorrow into an object, a tangible proof that human emotion could be harvested and preserved. Merchants whispered prayers, samurai doubted courage, citizens clutched loved ones closer, all knowing that the executioner's reach was absolute. His fascination with tears elevated him beyond a simple killer. He became a collector, an archivist of agony, preserving the essence of human suffering in glass vessels lined along shadowed walls. Each jar told a story, silent but potent, speaking of lives ended too soon, of fear crystallized into something permanent. Visitors, few and coerced, trembled before him, understanding that proximity to his obsession meant witnessing horror in its purest form. He did not speak, for words were unnecessary. The language of terror sufficed, and he could read it in every flinch, every intake of breath, every tear shed. The city seemed to acknowledge his dominion, as if Tokyo itself bent to the rhythm of his steps, its alleys vibrating with a quiet, unyielding dread. Night after night he transformed life into fear, emotion into control, death into a meticulously orchestrated performance, each act feeding the next with relentless inevitability. The executioner's legend grew not merely from brutality, but from the artistry of his cruelty, the precision of his obsession, and the inescapable reach of his gaze. Even sunlight could not erase his mark. The city woke with the memory of terror still clinging to walls, doorways, and quiet corners. His obsession was methodical, cataloging each reaction, each tear, each shiver, weaving them into a tapestry of despair that only he could understand, only he could preserve. The wind seemed to carry his influence, bending through streets as if aware of his presence, echoing the faint remnants of sobs, a chilling reminder that fear could be tangible, collectible, permanent. Families whispered, hearts raced, and yet he remained unseen, a shadow among shadows, patient, precise, and untouchable. Every cry, every gasp, every moment of panic was transformed into a tangible element, stored with devotion and measured with obsession, until the city itself became a living archive of terror. His reputation stretched beyond Tokyo, whispered by travelers and merchants alike, his methods studied in fear, his name unspoken but omnipresent. Each night the collection of tears continued, meticulous, unending, a ritual that elevated him from mere executioner to a master of human despair. Even the bravest, those who sought to confront him, found themselves paralyzed by the knowledge that his reach extended into the deepest corners of their own minds. And yet, despite the horror, there was a fascination, a morbid allure that drew whispers closer, stories taller, eyes wider, for none could deny the meticulous artistry of his cruelty. Each night ended, but his work remained, embedded in the walls, the jars, and the city itself, a lingering shadow that Tokyo could never escape. A reminder that some darkness is not bound by time, place, or mortal limitations. The executioner's mansion stood like a fortress of sorrow, hidden from the city yet omnipresent in the minds of those who feared him. Candlelight flickered across the jars, each filled with the collected tears of victims, shimmering faintly like trapped souls. He moved silently through his halls, meticulous and patient, observing the residue of agony left behind, cataloging it as though it were scripture. Tokyo slept uneasily, its streets haunted by rumors and the faint echoes of cries that could not be explained. Families whispered tales of doors that slammed on their own, shadows that moved without source, and distant sobs that seemed to follow anyone who dared walk alone at night. The executioner was always present, though invisible, and his collection grew with each passing day. Every tear represented a life altered, a fear realized, a human spirit bending under the weight of terror. Visitors, coerced or foolishly curious, emerged trembling, forever haunted by the knowledge that this man had transcended ordinary cruelty. He was not merely an executioner, he was a curator of despair, an archivist of anguish, and his obsession transformed every death into a carefully measured testament to human fragility. The streets themselves seemed to whisper his name, carrying a collective fear that bound the city in a silent contract. Obey the shadows, respect the unseen, or suffer the consequences. No one dared cross him, for his mind was as sharp as the blade he wielded, his patience endless and his understanding of fear absolute. Each execution followed a rhythm, a choreography of terror, where every shiver, every gasp, every tear was anticipated, observed, and preserved. His obsession with collecting tears was more than cruelty. It was a philosophy, a perverse art form that elevated him beyond mere mortal bounds. Tokyo became a theater of shadows under his dominion, a place where the living trembled and the dead whispered through memory and legend. Even the bravest samurai hesitated when approaching the areas rumored to bear his passage, and merchants counted the hours until dawn with a growing sense of unease. The executioner's influence extended beyond physical presence. His work seeped into the hearts and minds of the city, creating an invisible network of dread that could not be avoided. Each night the jars gleamed under candlelight, holding silent stories, faint glimmers of lives extinguished, and the lingering residue of fear that he harvested with devotion. He moved like a shadow among shadows, patient, meticulous, and untouchable, observing the ebb and flow of human terror as if conducting an orchestra of anguish. The city's pulse adjusted to his rhythm, a subtle, ever-present reminder that some horrors were inescapable. Children awoke in cold sweats. Mothers whispered prayers to silent gods, and men found their courage faltering as stories of vanished neighbors spread. Every step he took left a mark, not in blood alone, but in the hearts of those who felt the weight of his gaze, a pressure that could not be seen, yet could be sensed in every corner of the city. His methodical collection of tears turned despair into something tangible, a catalogue of suffering that would outlive him, a haunting legacy preserved in glass. No law, no sword, no strategy could confront him directly. The executioner had transcended ordinary measures, becoming a phantom that haunted not just the streets but minds and souls. He thrived in silence, in anticipation, in the ritual of watching and collecting, each night a testament to his obsession and the depth of human vulnerability. Tokyo's nights were filled with subtle tremors, the echo of footsteps that could never be traced, cries that might have been imagined but left a real imprint on memory, a constant reminder that fear could be measured, harvested, and preserved. The executioner's legend grew not only from the horror he inflicted, but from the meticulous artistry of his obsession, the perfection of his rituals, and the terrifying omnipresence of his gaze. The city existed under an unspoken dominion, a rule not enforced by law but by dread, and each tear collected was both a token and a testimony to lives overshadowed by fear. Even in the daylight, the memory of night lingered, the jars in the mansion catching candlelight and refracting it like pale ghosts, silently asserting the executioner's influence over Tokyo. Each night concluded, but his work was far from over. The collection of tears continued, patient, deliberate, unending, a chilling reminder that some darkness is permanent, some horror cannot be erased, and some legends are forged in sorrow that no one can escape. 1885 Tokyo was a city of contrasts where tradition and change clashed in narrow streets, lantern-lit alleys, and shadowed corners. The old temples cast long, eerie shadows that seemed to watch the living as carefully as the dead. In this city of whispers and silent fears, the executioner operated, a man whose reputation had begun to permeate every layer of society. His background was shrouded in mystery, rumors suggesting a childhood steeped in cruelty where witnessing death was as common as witnessing life. Some said he had been orphaned young, raised by strict elders who valued obedience over compassion, punishment over understanding. Others whispered of a bloodline tainted with obsession, an inheritance of cruelty that shaped his fascination with the fragility of human emotion. Whatever the truth, by the time he emerged in Tokyo's shadows, he was already a master of fear, his mind calculating, precise, and deeply attuned to human suffering. The city itself became a canvas for his methods, each district, each alleyway, and each house an unwitting participant in his grim theater. Samurai, merchants, and ordinary citizens alike had heard of him, but none fully comprehended the meticulous nature of his craft. He did not act impulsively. Every step, every movement, every execution was carefully planned, studied, and rehearsed in the shadows of his mind. His fascination with tears began early, it is said, perhaps as a child who watched grief unfold and saw in it a strange, haunting beauty. In Tokyo, a city teetering between old customs and new order, this obsession found fertile ground. He began selecting victims with precision, studying their routines, learning their fears, cataloging the nuances of human terror like a scholar of the macabre. Rumors spread of houses abandoned after mysterious disappearances, of children too terrified to speak, of families fleeing at dusk to escape a presence that seemed intangible yet all-encompassing. He moved in silence, almost blending with the night itself, appearing only when the perfect moment arrived. His mansion became a repository not only of tears but also of careful notes, diagrams, and observations detailing the human response to fear, a library of anguish that he alone could interpret. Scholars and mystics speculated on his methods, some suggesting supernatural insight, others attributing his success to unparalleled intellect and an unrelenting patience. Few dared approach him, for he was both meticulous and unpredictable, a combination that rendered any confrontation deadly. He understood human psychology in ways few could imagine, predicting reactions, exploiting weaknesses, and transforming ordinary spaces into chambers of dread. The background of Tokyo at the time also played into his hands. Political instability, shifting social orders, and fear of rebellion created an atmosphere where terror could thrive unnoticed. Streets teemed with rumors of disappearances that no one could verify, and the executioner's name became synonymous with inexplicable horror. Families who once walked the streets confidently now moved with a measured caution, their routines altered, their hearts heavy with unspoken dread. Observers noted that even the most mundane events, the closing of a door, the flicker of a lantern, the echo of a footstep, could become instruments of fear in his hands. His knowledge of human nature was profound, bordering on obsessive, allowing him to manipulate emotions, orchestrate reactions, and cultivate a pervasive sense of unease that affected the entire city. Teachers, merchants, and even visiting dignitaries reported an unshakable feeling of being watched, though no eye could be seen. And yet, despite this omnipresence, he remained unseen, a ghost operating in plain sight, orchestrating terror as though it were a ritual. Even his assistants, rare as they were, spoke of his meticulous methods, how every jar of tears, every observation, and every small act contributed to a larger understanding of fear. An empire built not on land but on the psyche of Tokyo's citizens. The city became an unwitting participant, each citizen a data point, each reaction recorded in his mind and in the journals that lined his mansion. His reputation grew slowly at first, whispered in marketplaces, over meals, behind doors, then louder, more confident, as stories of vanished individuals, frozen families, and cries that seemed to echo from nowhere reached every corner. Samurai, bound by honor yet human in their fears, hesitated in alleys he was rumored to visit. Merchants hesitated to leave their shops after dusk, their eyes scanning every shadow, every corner for a figure who might already know their deepest fears. In this background of social tension and instability, the executioner thrived, exploiting human fragility with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. The city's architecture aided him. Narrow lanes, hidden courtyards, and towering walls amplified sound and shadow, turning ordinary spaces into stages for terror. His understanding of these spaces, combined with an encyclopedic knowledge of human behavior, allowed him to operate with impunity. Those few who dared to investigate his methods found only fragments, glimpses of horror too fleeting to comprehend fully, each insight followed by another disappearance, another act that solidified his dominance. It was said that he could anticipate fear as one anticipates the tide, a natural force inevitable, unstoppable, and so Tokyo itself became a living participant in his experiments, its citizens unwittingly contributing to a macabre study of emotion. Each tear shed, each shiver observed, each scream catalogued and preserved. The executioner was not merely a product of his environment, but a master of it, a manipulator of fear, a silent puppeteer pulling strings invisible to all but himself. The executioner's mastery extended beyond mere observation. He understood the smallest tremor, the faintest gasp, the slightest twitch as a language of its own. Each victim became a case study, a living record of how fear manifested in mind and body, and he catalogued these meticulously. His mansion expanded with each discovery, rooms lined with jars, notes, sketches, and diagrams detailing every nuance of human emotion under duress. The walls seemed alive, resonating with past horrors, every corner whispering stories of anguish that could never fully be erased. Outside, Tokyo remained unaware of the full scope of his work. Though the city's pulse subtly shifted, its inhabitants moving with measured caution, each aware of an invisible presence that could strike at any moment. Legends grew around him. Street children spoke of a shadow that followed them, merchants of sudden chills in empty rooms and travelers of footsteps echoing in silent corridors where no one walked. Even the city guards trained in discipline and combat hesitated, sensing an intelligence beyond the physical, a method to cruelty that was precise, patient, and unrelenting. The executioner did not kill for sport or for gain. He killed to understand, to collect, to observe the unfolding of terror in its purest form. His fascination with tears became central, each drop a measure of suffering, a crystallization of fear that could be preserved indefinitely. Families who vanished left behind traces too subtle for most to detect. Yet to him, every sign was a clue, a pattern, a confirmation of his method's success. He exploited the city's natural architecture, the alleys, courtyards, and lantern-lit streets, turning them into extensions of his will, instruments that amplified every reaction he sought. Scholars who attempted to study him from afar concluded that his understanding of human psychology was unrivaled, bordering on obsession, bordering on genius. He could predict actions before they happened, manipulate spaces to provoke reactions, and extract terror from moments the world would deem mundane. The political climate of Tokyo at the time, fraught with tension and uncertainty, provided him with an invisible shield. Citizens feared reporting anomalies, dismissing them as superstition, while he operated with near-total impunity, collecting tears, observing fear, and refining his craft. Merchants altered routines, children hid indoors, and samurai avoided streets he was rumored to frequent. But none could truly defend against an opponent who had mastered the intangible. Every jar, every note, every observation became part of a larger framework, a meticulous archive that elevated him beyond simple executioner to curator of despair. His methods were ritualistic, almost sacred, performed with a precision that transformed human suffering into a tangible and permanent record. The mansion became both laboratory and shrine, its halls filled with a silence heavier than night, punctuated only by the faint glimmer of tears in jars reflecting candlelight. Some visitors, coerced into witnessing his work, emerged transformed, trembling, haunted by the understanding that what they had seen was not merely cruelty but artistry, a terrifying, meticulous mastery of human emotion. Rumors suggested supernatural involvement, whispers that he could feel fear before it manifested, anticipate reactions as if reading the minds of those around him. And yet, no evidence supported these claims beyond the chilling perfection of his methods, the unerring precision with which each act of terror unfolded. Each disappearance, each collected tear, each observation reinforced his reputation, an invisible empire built from the fear of Tokyo's citizens. The streets themselves seemed complicit, echoing sounds, shadows, and movements that magnified his influence, each alley a stage for a performance of dread. Even the bravest of the city's inhabitants, those who had never encountered him, adjusted their lives according to stories, rumors, and subtle warnings, creating a network of psychological control that extended his reach far beyond physical presence. The executioner's obsession ensured that no detail was overlooked, no reaction went undocumented, and no opportunity to harvest despair was wasted. Night after night, Tokyo existed under an invisible dominion, a city unknowingly participating in a study of human vulnerability. Every scream, every sob, every silent tear became data, catalogued in jars and journals, a permanent record of his unrelenting pursuit of mastery over fear. The city's heartbeat, once free and unaware, now pulsed in sync with his shadow, a rhythm dictated not by natural life but by the subtle orchestration of terror. Even as the sun rose and normal life resumed, the echoes of the night lingered in minds and spaces, a reminder that some darkness cannot be escaped. His legend grew not merely from acts of cruelty, but from an artistry that turned fear into an instrument, sorrow into a measurable entity, and tears into permanent testimony. Every corner, every room, every alleyway became part of a vast unseen network through which he projected his influence. He had transformed Tokyo into a theater of psychological torment, an environment where fear could be collected, preserved, and studied indefinitely. And in this city, beneath the veneer of normalcy, the executioner reigned silently, patient, meticulous, untouchable, a master of terror whose work extended far beyond any individual victim. Rumors began to ripple through Tokyo as families whispered of unexplained disappearances, of children vanishing while doors were locked, of merchants finding jars of unknown liquid on their doorsteps, and of shadows moving in impossible ways. The executioner's presence became a force that could be felt without being seen, a silent hand guiding fear into every heart. His victims were chosen with meticulous care, selected not randomly but for the subtle qualities of their responses, the trembling in their hands, the widening of their eyes, the cadence of their sobs. Citizens began noticing patterns they could not explain. Neighbors gone without a trace, subtle disturbances in their homes, the sensation of being watched even when alone. No one could trace his movements. No guard, no soldier, no civilian could anticipate when or where he would strike next. Whispers told of lanterns flickering in abandoned alleys, of distant cries carried on the wind, of shadows that lingered far too long, all signs of his invisible passage. He observed meticulously, noting reactions to every sound, every creak of wood, every gust of wind. Children began to hide at the slightest hint of shadow. Mothers clutched their infants closer at night, and even the city's most disciplined samurai adjusted their patrols to avoid streets where the executioner was rumored to appear. Each night he tested the limits of fear, experimenting with silence, darkness, and the smallest, most subtle disturbances to provoke emotion. Every reaction was recorded in his journals, a catalog of human vulnerability that fed into the ever-growing collection of tears. Even the simplest tasks, walking through a narrow street, crossing a quiet courtyard, opening a shop at dawn, became exercises in anticipation, with citizens acutely aware that the unseen predator could be observing. Rumors spread of a shadow that could anticipate your heartbeat, of footsteps in alleys where no one walked, of whispered cries that seemed to echo from nowhere. The executioner's influence extended beyond direct interaction. The very atmosphere of the city seemed tainted, every breath heavy with unseen menace. Merchants found jars mysteriously appearing near their stalls, filled with a liquid that glimmered faintly, and these objects became symbols of dread, reinforcing the idea that no space was truly safe. Families adjusted their routines, children avoided certain streets, and even the city's guards found themselves hesitant to investigate disturbances. Sensing that he was always one step ahead, he became an invisible force, manipulating environments, studying reactions, and perfecting techniques that transformed ordinary spaces into theaters of terror. Lanterns swayed in empty courtyards, doors slammed without cause, shadows shifted unnaturally, and every instance was another experiment in fear, another opportunity to gather the precious currency of tears. Citizens whispered of a man who could feel their dread before it manifested, who knew their movements before they acted, and who left no evidence of his presence beyond the lingering sense of violation and unease. As his collection of tears grew, so did his mastery of psychological manipulation, elevating him beyond mere executioner to something closer to a phantom, a ghost who reshaped reality through terror alone. Each incident, each subtle provocation, served to tighten the city's invisible chains, ensuring that fear was constant, omnipresent, and inescapable. Night became a domain where ordinary logic failed, where shadows seemed alive, and where every heartbeat was measured, catalogued, and harvested. The executioner's influence was cumulative. Each act of terror reinforced the next, creating a compounding effect of dread that no one could resist. Parents whispered warnings to children who could not comprehend fully. Merchants spoke of unnatural sensations that defied reason, and even samurai found themselves doubting their training in the face of pervasive unease. His methods were subtle yet relentless, transforming fear into an observable, collectible substance. Each response a data point, each tear a trophy. The city's architecture, its winding alleys, its narrow lanes, and hidden courtyards became instruments in his silent symphony of terror. Even the moonlight seemed altered, reflecting differently in the shadows he orchestrated, highlighting paths where fear would bloom most vividly. Rumors of his supernatural abilities flourished, whispers claiming he could sense emotions, anticipate reactions, and strike without being seen, though no concrete evidence supported these claims beyond the perfection of his manipulations. Families avoided certain districts, children slept uneasily, merchants carried charms, and guards hesitated at dusk, each aware that even the most mundane action could provoke his attention. The executioner tested boundaries continuously, moving through the city like an invisible conductor, orchestrating subtle acts that built tension, anxiety, and anticipation. Night after night, the city became a living laboratory, every alley, courtyard, and shadow contributing to his growing understanding of fear. Every gasp, every shiver, every involuntary tear was catalogued, contributing to the intricate web of terror that stretched across Tokyo. Citizens began adjusting lives according to these unseen influences, the city itself bending to his will without knowing the full scope of the predator within. Even those who had never seen him felt the impact, as if the air itself carried his presence, a reminder that fear could be omnipresent, measurable, and collectible. The executioner refined his methods with meticulous care, transforming the city into a theater of psychological terror. Each victim was chosen not merely for opportunity, but for the subtle nuances of their fear, the way their hands trembled, their breathing changed, the quiver in their voice. He observed from shadows through alleys behind walls, taking note of every movement, every hesitation, every involuntary response. Families began to alter their routines. Children avoided certain streets and merchants closed shops early, all driven by an unspoken terror that had become woven into the fabric of daily life. The executioner exploited these shifts, using the smallest disruptions to provoke reactions, testing limits and measuring human fragility. Even the city guards, trained in discipline and vigilance, found themselves hesitant, uncertain, their instincts warning of a presence that defied detection. Nightfall became a ritual of dread, as citizens moved cautiously through streets that had once been ordinary, their senses heightened, their minds anticipating unseen threats. Shadows elongated unnaturally. Lanterns flickered in corridors, doors creaked without cause, and the faintest noises were magnified in perception. Each reaction, no matter how minor, fed into his growing catalog, adding to the archive of human despair he maintained in his mansion. The collection of tears was central to this process, a tangible record of emotion captured in a way that transcended ordinary observation. Visitors who encountered the mansion, either through coercion or curiosity, left trembling, their understanding incomplete, forever haunted by glimpses of a system so meticulous, so precise, that cruelty became indistinguishable from art. Rumors spread beyond Tokyo, stories carried by travelers of a man who could sense fear before it manifested, who moved unseen, and who could manipulate the environment with uncanny precision. Merchants spoke of jars appearing mysteriously, filled with liquid that glimmered like captured sorrow, each artifact reinforcing the legend, each whisper amplifying dread. The city itself adapted unconsciously, citizens' movements dictated by invisible boundaries, routines shaped by fear, a collective dance orchestrated without knowledge. The executioner's patience was unparalleled. He understood that terror was cumulative, building over time, each small act contributing to a pervasive, omnipresent sense of unease. Even the bravest faltered, their minds attuned to subtle anomalies, their instincts warning of unseen manipulation. He exploited architecture and environment masterfully, using narrow lanes, courtyards, and lantern-lit streets to amplify reactions, turning ordinary spaces into instruments of psychological control. Every night he expanded his knowledge, testing the limits of endurance, mapping the responses of citizens with precision, storing each result in jars, journals, and meticulous notes. Stories of vanished neighbors, doors opening without cause, and cries in the distance spread, reinforcing a psychological network that extended his influence beyond physical presence. Families whispered warnings, children slept uneasily, merchants prepared charms and talismans, yet none could fully comprehend the scope of his observation. Each reaction fed into a larger system, a network of terror that grew exponentially, binding the city in invisible chains of anticipation and dread. Shadows became alive under his scrutiny, movements subtly orchestrated, every sigh, every glance, every pulse measured and catalogued. The executioner's methods were precise, ritualistic, and unwavering, a demonstration of patience and obsession so profound it elevated him beyond mortal comprehension. He did not need to strike physically at all times. The mere presence of uncertainty, the whisper of possibility, the anticipation of fear became tools in his arsenal. Night after night, Tokyo's citizens unknowingly participated in a vast experiment, each tear shed, each shiver observed, contributing to a growing archive of human vulnerability. The mansion, the alleys, the hidden courtyards, all became extensions of his will, spaces where reality bent to the rhythm of orchestrated terror. Even daylight could not erase the residue of night, as stories, rumors, and subtle signs persisted, keeping the city in a continuous state of heightened awareness. Merchants whispered at dawn, mothers kept children close, samurai altered patrols, and the city itself seemed to tremble under the invisible influence of the executioner. Every reaction, every measured fear, every unconscious gesture added to the tapestry of dread he wove across Tokyo, an invisible web that tightened with each passing night. The executioner's obsession with tears ensured that every moment of terror was captured, catalogued, and preserved, an unending cycle of study and collection. Each jar, each note, each subtle observation contributed to a meticulous archive, transforming fear into something tangible, permanent, and wieldable. He became a phantom in the city's collective consciousness, unseen yet omnipresent, a master of manipulation, who understood that the greatest power lies not in brute force, but in control of the mind and the emotions. The city lived in anticipation, every street, every shadow, every corner a potential stage for the continuation of his experiments. Tokyo, once bustling and ordinary, had become a living testament to the precision, patience, and terrifying genius of one man who harvested fear, preserved sorrow, and turned human emotion into an art form beyond comprehension. The night arrived when the executioner's methods reached their apex, a culmination of years spent observing, collecting, and perfecting his craft. Tokyo held its breath as shadows lengthened, streets grew silent, and an unspoken dread gripped every corner. He had chosen his victims carefully, the selection meticulous, each person representing a piece in a horrifying puzzle. Families felt a weight in the air, a foreboding sense that something monumental was unfolding, though no one could see it. Lanterns flickered against the walls, casting long, twisted shapes that danced in the periphery of vision. Every step he took was calculated, measured, designed to provoke maximum terror while maintaining absolute control. His mansion became the stage for a ritual unlike any seen before, the jars of tears reflecting candlelight like faintly glowing witnesses to the impending climax. Victims were guided silently, compelled by fear, confusion, or subtle manipulation, each responding exactly as he anticipated. The executioner observed with clinical detachment, noting reactions, cataloging every flinch, every gasp, every tear that fell. The city beyond remained unaware, the ordinary sounds of life masking the extraordinary horror taking place behind hidden doors and shadowed alleys. This night was not about random terror. It was a precise orchestration, a culmination of knowledge and obsession that transformed fear into a tangible, almost palpable force. Whispers circulated among those who glimpsed fragments, stories of doors slamming violently, shadows moving impossibly, cries that froze blood mid-chest, all part of a pattern no one yet understood. Within the mansion, each victim experienced terror on a level that transcended ordinary comprehension, their reactions feeding directly into his growing archive. He watched the tears, collected them with care, and interpreted them with the precision of a scientist, each drop revealing nuances in fear, despair, and helplessness. His methods were relentless, leaving no margin for error, no room for human unpredictability to interfere with the symphony of anguish he conducted. The executioner's presence was absolute. He moved unseen, yet his influence pervaded every heartbeat, every pulse, every shiver. Night deepened, and the rituals escalated in intensity, each act designed to extract maximum emotional response, each moment a step toward a terrifying revelation. Families outside clutched their loved ones tighter, sensing a shift in the city, a heaviness that descended without explanation. Travelers reported feeling eyes upon them, shadows bending unnaturally as if the night itself had become conscious of terror. The executioner's mansion, once a repository of observation, now became a crucible of horror, where emotion was distilled into pure, collectible essence. Victims' screams, gasps, and tears intertwined into a chorus of anguish, recorded meticulously, stored with precision, transforming the moment into permanent evidence of suffering. He did not need to threaten physically. The anticipation of pain, the manipulation of perception, the orchestration of fear sufficed to produce the responses he required. Candlelight flickered over jars, highlighting the reflective surfaces of collected sorrow, illuminating the meticulous documentation of human fragility. Each step in his method was executed flawlessly, a dance between observation and orchestration, where every reaction was anticipated and every tear harvested. Stories spread, fragments of what occurred slipping through the city in whispers, rumors of a night when fear was absolute, yet invisible, a terror that could not be escaped, quantified, or resisted. Even the bravest samurai hesitated at alleys rumored to be part of the executioner's orchestration, their instincts warning them of an unseen hand manipulating perception and emotion. The culmination of his work on this night was more than cruelty. It was a demonstration of control, mastery over life, death, and the intangible currents of human fear. Observers, few as they were, left trembling, forever haunted by the precision, patience, and perfection of the ritual. Each tear collected represented a victory over human emotion, a confirmation that terror could be curated, preserved, and utilized. As the night deepened further, the mansion became a theater of shadows, candlelight, and trembling forms, each moment choreographed to elicit maximum despair. Even the architecture contributed, corridors echoing with gasps, staircases amplifying trembling steps, shadows bending in ways that heightened perception of menace. Outside, Tokyo slept, unaware that its very heartbeat had been measured, its collective psyche observed, manipulated, catalogued, and harvested. This climax was the apex of the executioner's methodology, a night that solidified his control over fear itself, a demonstration of obsession elevated to art. Each collected tear, each documented reaction, each moment of terror contributed to an archive that would remain long after the city awoke, invisible but indelible. The executioner's mastery of emotion, space, and perception reached its peak, leaving victims irrevocably altered, their terror distilled, and the city unknowingly participating in a ritual of psychological domination. By dawn, the mansion stood silent once more, jars glimmering faintly in the early light, a record of suffering, a monument to the perfection of fear, and a reminder that some horrors are beyond comprehension, existing only in the shadowed spaces between observation and obsession. The executioner's ritual intensified as the night deepened, each movement calculated, each shadow manipulated to perfection. Victims were drawn into his labyrinth of fear, their senses heightened, minds fraying, every heartbeat echoing with anticipation of horrors only he could orchestrate. Candlelight flickered across jars, illuminating the tears collected, each one a testament to anguish, each one a crystallized proof of his mastery. The mansion became alive with silent cries, tremors, and shivers, a symphony of despair recorded with meticulous devotion. No action was wasted. Every whisper, every breath, every involuntary movement was part of the experiment, contributing to the permanent archive of terror he maintained. Tokyo outside remained oblivious, unaware that the invisible hand guiding fear had reached its apex. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, alleys bent perception, and even the air seemed to vibrate with tension, as if the city itself recognized the climax unfolding within the mansion. The executioner observed from hidden vantage points, noting subtle changes in expression, the widening of eyes, the trembling of hands, the quiver of lips, all reactions recorded with painstaking precision. Each victim's emotional spectrum was catalogued, every tear a metric of despair, and every gasp a data point in the study of human vulnerability. Rumors of impossible sightings traveled quickly. Lanterns that moved on their own, distant screams in empty streets, shadows that seemed to shift with intent. Citizens whispered of a presence they could feel but never see, a weight that pressed upon them even in daylight, hinting at the night's culmination. Inside, the mansion's architecture served as a perfect instrument, amplifying fear, reflecting shadows, echoing screams, and guiding attention to exactly where it would provoke the most profound response. The executioner's patience was infinite. Each movement, each pause, each orchestrated moment contributed to a crescendo of terror that left no room for deviation. Visitors forced to witness glimpses of his work emerged, changed, their minds haunted, forever aware that they had glimpsed a precision of cruelty unmatched in human memory. The ritual's intensity escalated, reaching points where time seemed suspended and fear became tangible, a substance that could be measured, collected, and preserved. Every tear harvested was a victory over the unpredictability of human emotion, a demonstration of control, a confirmation of mastery. The night progressed, and with each passing hour, the executioner's influence spread further subtly, invisibly, into the psyche of every observer, every participant, even those outside the mansion. He had become a phantom puppeteer, manipulating not only actions but perceptions, emotions and expectations with a precision that blurred the line between reality and orchestrated terror. The jars glimmered with collected sorrow, their presence a constant reminder of his meticulous obsession and the permanence of human fragility. Citizens continued routines under the shadow of rumor, each step a potential test, each glance a contribution to the invisible web of fear he had spun. The mansion's interior reflected a perfection of design, aimed at extracting maximum emotional response. Every candle, corridor, and stairwell meticulously positioned to influence perception. The executioner's orchestration was flawless. No scream went unnoticed, no tear uncollected, no reaction undocumented. Outside, Tokyo slept, yet the city had changed. Its heartbeat aligned with the rhythm of terror, its streets filled with unspoken apprehension. Each act, each observation, each moment of harvested emotion contributed to a legacy of fear that would endure beyond the night, beyond memory, beyond comprehension. By the final hour, the climax reached its inevitable conclusion. The mansion silent, jars filled, journals completed, and victims irrevocably altered, their terror captured in a form both permanent and intangible. The executioner remained unseen, his work complete, yet his presence lingered, a shadow across minds, streets, and alleys, a chilling testament to the power of obsessive mastery over human fear. Tokyo would never be the same. Even daylight could not erase the impact of that night, for the records of suffering, the subtle manipulations, and the harvested tears existed beyond the ordinary perception, a haunting legacy of the man who had collected the very essence of despair. The night ended, but the memory persisted, a permanent scar on the city's consciousness, a reminder that some horrors are orchestrated with such precision that they cannot be forgotten, cannot be escaped, and exist forever in the spaces between fear and obsession. The city awoke to a haunting silence, streets seemingly unchanged yet forever altered. Families whispered cautiously, recounting tales of the previous night, of shadows that lingered, of tears collected in silence, and of horrors they could neither explain nor forget. The executioner's work left an imprint that could not be erased. Tokyo itself seemed to shiver under the weight of the unseen influence. Merchants spoke quietly of jars found at doorsteps, glimmering faintly in the morning light, tangible reminders of terror harvested with meticulous precision. Even the bravest samurai hesitated, recalling the subtle manipulations, the anticipations of fear, the unseen orchestration that had left victims irrevocably changed. Children avoided alleys once familiar, their steps hesitant, their senses sharpened to every flicker of shadow, every creak of wood, every whisper of wind. The mansion, still cloaked in darkness and silence, held the collected essence of fear, a chilling archive of human fragility. The executioner's influence extended beyond direct victims. It permeated the psyche of the city, weaving a web of apprehension that altered daily life in subtle yet undeniable ways. Ordinary routines became exercises in anticipation. Moments once mundane transformed into stages for potential terror, and citizens moved with the caution of those who understood that the unseen could strike at any moment. Scholars and mystics debated the nature of his methods, some suggesting supernatural prowess, others attributing the perfection of his orchestration to unrelenting obsession and intelligence. In every home, whispers of the night's events circulated. Stories passed between neighbors, parents, and children, each retelling reinforcing the pervasive sense of dread. Even the air seemed heavier, charged with the residue of fear that could not dissipate with sunlight alone. Every shiver, every sigh, every tear collected during the ritual contributed to the expanding archive of despair, a record that would outlast the night, outlast the city, and remain in memory as a chilling testament to human vulnerability. Reports emerged of individuals changed irreversibly, haunted by visions and sounds that others could not perceive. The memory of terror lingering in the deepest recesses of the mind. Families found themselves hesitant to speak, fearful that any word could summon attention from the invisible orchestrator of fear. The executioner had achieved more than the physical act of terror. He had elevated fear to an art form, a methodical, permanent force that transcended ordinary comprehension. The city's social fabric shifted subtly. Streets grew quieter, conversations more cautious, eyes constantly scanning for threats that may never manifest but were always felt. Merchants left goods unsold, avoiding areas rumored to be connected to the mansion, while children slept with lanterns flickering near their beds, warding against imagined shadows. Even the samurai, disciplined and trained, acknowledged the limits of their perception, recognizing that some forces, like the executioner's mastery over fear, could not be confronted through strength alone. Rumors of jars filled with tears became legends in their own right, whispered across tea houses and markets, proof that fear had been collected, preserved, and catalogued. Citizens began to develop subtle routines, unspoken agreements about where to walk, when to close doors, how to avoid certain streets, all in response to the invisible hand that had orchestrated terror with precision. The executioner remained unseen, yet his presence lingered in the city like a shadow that could not be escaped. Every interaction, every step, every glance carried the weight of potential observation, the understanding that fear was both omnipresent and unavoidable. The mansion itself, a fortress of silence, held within its walls the distilled essence of human despair, a haunting collection that elevated him beyond mortal executioner to something closer to phantom or specter. Visitors, coerced or curious, emerged with minds altered, their understanding of terror forever expanded, their perception of safety forever fractured. Even sunlight could not erase the imprint of his work. Jars glimmered faintly, corridors echoed with memory, and every corner of Tokyo retained traces of the psychological landscape he had reshaped. The executioner's methods left the city in a state of constant vigilance, a population unknowingly participating in a ritual that continued beyond observation, beyond memory, beyond comprehension. Scholars sought to understand, to document, to interpret, yet found only fragments, fleeting evidence of a precision and patience that defied ordinary logic. Families whispered warnings to one another, children hesitated at thresholds, and merchants carried talismans to guard against unseen eyes, each action reflecting the enduring influence of a night meticulously orchestrated. The aftermath was not merely the absence of the executioner, it was the presence of his methods, the lingering sense of observation, the permanent alteration of human perception. Tokyo existed now under an invisible dominion, a city whose heartbeat had synchronized with the rhythm of fear, where shadows held meaning, and every moment of uncertainty contributed to the archive of human fragility. The days that followed the climax were filled with subtle terror, echoes of the executioner's orchestration lingering in every corner of Tokyo. Families walked cautiously, eyes scanning shadows, hearts quickening at the faintest noise, their routines reshaped by invisible forces. Children whispered of shapes that moved in corners, of faint cries that seemed to emanate from empty streets, and parents shushed them with nervous glances, uncertain if imagination or reality had taken hold. Merchants spoke quietly among themselves of jars glimmering faintly, left in doorways or along alleys, mysterious reminders that fear had been collected, catalogued, and preserved. Even samurai, trained in discipline and courage, hesitated to patrol certain streets, sensing an intelligence beyond comprehension, a presence that could manipulate perception and emotion without ever being seen. The mansion remained silent, a fortress of collected despair, jars glinting in the dim light, their contents a chilling record of human fragility. Scholars and mystics debated endlessly, some claiming supernatural ability, others attributing the executioner's perfection to obsessive intelligence and patient mastery. The city's fabric had been subtly altered. Ordinary tasks were approached with caution. Mundane movements measured against unseen risk, and whispers of the night's events passed between neighbors, reinforcing the invisible chains of fear. Rumors persisted, growing with each telling, lanterns swaying where no wind blew, distant screams in silent streets, shadows bending unnaturally, all evidence of a presence impossible to confront. Families spoke of children who refused to enter certain rooms, of sudden tremors in the hands of loved ones, of emotional responses inexplicable by normal understanding. The executioner's influence had become a permanent fixture, a psychological architecture woven into Tokyo itself. Even those who had not witnessed his acts felt the tension, the unspoken understanding that some force watched, catalogued, and anticipated human behavior with uncanny precision. Night brought no relief. Shadows deepened. Alleys grew ominous, and the faintest sound carried a weight of potential observation. Candlelight flickered in homes as guardians watched corners and parents comforted children who trembled despite reassurances. Merchants left goods unsold to avoid perceived dangers. Travelers altered paths, and samurai adjusted patrols to account for invisible threats, all evidence of the pervasive psychological dominion established. The mansion, though silent, continued to function as a repository of collected terror, jars of tears reflecting candlelight like quiet witnesses to events that could never be undone. The executioner's meticulous methods ensured that each reaction, each shiver, each involuntary tear contributed to a permanent archive, a testimony to mastery over human vulnerability. Scholars attempting to document the phenomenon found only fragments, fleeting glimpses that hinted at the scope and precision of his work. Yet none could comprehend the entirety. Families whispered warnings. Children learned fear instinctively, and the city adapted to an unseen hand that dictated not violence but anticipation, emotion, and perception. Each citizen, knowingly or not, became part of a grand experiment, their reactions feeding into the invisible ledger of fear maintained within the mansion. The city's collective psyche had been reshaped. Even in daylight, the memory of night's terror lingered, and ordinary spaces became charged with potential menace. Jars glimmered, halls echoed, and streets remained haunted by the psychological imprint of his orchestration. Tokyo had been transformed from within, a city whose heartbeat now carried the rhythm of dread, where shadows signified unseen mastery, and the unseen presence of the executioner lingered indefinitely. The aftermath was a permanent state, a blending of memory, observation, and anticipation, ensuring that fear could be felt without direct confrontation, influencing lives and altering perception for years to come. Families adapted, merchants modified routines, children learned caution as instinct, and even samurai approached their duties with heightened awareness. Each behavior, an acknowledgement of the invisible yet unyielding control he had established. The executioner's legacy became a psychological monument, a haunting that endured beyond the night, a record of mastery that no one could touch, no one could confront, and no one could forget. In every whispered story, every subtle reaction, every cautious movement, the influence persisted, a chilling testament to the precision, patience, and obsessive control that had elevated fear to art. Tokyo would carry the weight of that night indefinitely, a city haunted not by visible monsters but by the meticulous orchestration of terror and the permanent imprint of human fragility captured in tears. Despite the meticulous records, the executioner's methods remained shrouded in enigma. Scholars pored over journals, jars, and notes, yet no one could fully explain the perfection of his orchestration. Some whispered of supernatural insight, an uncanny ability to sense emotion before it manifested. Others argued it was the result of obsessive study, intelligence, and patience elevated to terrifying extremes. Streets of Tokyo held unanswered questions. Every shadow and alley a potential stage for events that defied logic. Families whispered of movements that could not be traced, sounds that had no source, and shapes that lingered in peripheral vision. Even victims once released or left unharmed carried memories that were fragmented, distorted, impossible to reconcile fully with reality. The jars of tears remained a silent testament to suffering, their contents perfectly preserved, yet the exact method of collection never fully explained. Legends grew, blending fact and rumor, suggesting that the executioner could manipulate perception itself, that fear became visible, tangible, measurable under his observation. Scientists attempting to analyze the liquid within the jars could not detect anything extraordinary, yet witnesses insisted that the substance contained more than water or salt. It contained the essence of despair, crystallized through terror. Questions about the mansion persisted. Hidden rooms, secret corridors, and spaces whose purpose could not be fully understood. Even when investigators entered, the architecture seemed to shift subtly, confounding orientation, creating the impression that the space itself was alive, responding to the presence of those within. Families avoided certain districts without knowing why. Travelers altered routes and the city adopted behaviors dictated by fear alone. Unconscious acknowledgement of the executioner's pervasive influence. Scholars debated endlessly, but none could account for the subtle mastery of psychological manipulation, the ability to provoke reactions without contact, the precision with which anticipation and dread were cultivated. Rumors claimed that he could predict responses, that he had mapped the spectrum of human emotion to the finest degree, yet the evidence remained fragmented, elusive, tantalizing. Even decades later, fragments of his work persisted, jars occasionally discovered, records surfaced, hints of methods lost to time yet hinting at perfection impossible to replicate. Tokyo itself seemed to carry the memory, streets imbued with subtle unease, citizens reacting instinctively to the invisible rules imposed by one man's obsessive control. The executioner's disappearance or death did not diminish the legacy. If anything, it amplified the mystery, leaving unanswered questions about the limits of human understanding and the boundaries between observation, manipulation, and mastery of fear. Whispers suggested that he had been more than mortal, that his influence extended beyond the physical, and that his work had altered the very perception of reality for those exposed to it. Families recounted stories that could not be confirmed. Children remembered shapes that could not exist, and merchants described jars appearing mysteriously even after the mansion was abandoned. The jars themselves became objects of lore, their contents representing terror perfected, preserved, and curated in a way science could not quantify. Investigators who attempted to reconstruct events found only partial records, corroborated by eyewitnesses whose memories were inconsistent, yet consistent in their overall impression of an almost supernatural orchestration of fear. Even today, the executioner's methods remain a puzzle. The precision, the anticipation, the psychological insight, all documented yet unexplained, leaving a lingering question of whether mastery of terror is a natural skill, learned technique, or something beyond comprehension. The mansion long abandoned continues to attract attention. Whispers of those who explore the crumbling halls describing strange sensations, echoes of past suffering, and glimpses of shadows that vanish when approached. The jars of tears, when discovered, evoke awe and horror, tangible evidence of a practice that combined obsession, intelligence, and cruelty in a way that no modern psychology can fully explain. Families recount that even reading the journals can elicit unease, as if the fear captured within transcends mere observation and seeps into the reader's consciousness. Tokyo itself remains haunted, not by ghosts in the traditional sense, but by the enduring mystery of a man who collected tears, mastered fear, and disappeared without trace, leaving a city forever changed, a legacy of unanswered questions, and an impossible standard of psychological precision. Even historians, years later, confront the problem of separating legend from fact, as each new account reveals subtle contradictions yet reinforces the sense of meticulous design, of orchestration beyond ordinary human capability. Shadows, silence, and whispers continue to define the city in memory and narrative, preserving the sense of dread, anticipation, and the unknown. The executioner's true methods, motivations, and ultimate fate remain lost, an enigma that challenges understanding and invites speculation. Even with the passage of years, the executioner's presence lingered in memory and rumor, in every shadowed alley of Tokyo. Investigators found jars tucked away in forgotten corners, the liquid within still shimmering faintly, a silent testament to precision and cruelty beyond ordinary comprehension. No one could explain how the tears retained the essence of fear, how they seemed to echo the emotions of those who had shed them. Scholars debated whether the collection was psychological, chemical, or something far beyond known science. Families spoke of subtle disturbances, faint whispers in quiet moments, and the sensation of being watched even where no one stood. The mansion itself, crumbling and abandoned, retained an aura of dread, with each room echoing past horrors, each hallway reflecting shadows as if memory had fused with stone and wood. Children dared each other to enter only to flee, reporting sensations that could not be explained. Chilling breezes, unexplained movements, fleeting shapes. Merchants recounted jars appearing mysteriously at doorsteps, even decades later, and tales of those who dared disturb them experiencing nightmares that seemed to pull from the memories of victims long gone. Samurai and soldiers recounted the persistence of instinctive caution, a residual effect of the executioner's manipulation of the city's collective psyche. Legends merged with fact. No account was entirely verifiable, yet all pointed to meticulous orchestration, a mastery of observation, prediction, and subtle psychological influence. Even historians struggled to separate truth from myth, yet fragments of documentation revealed a methodology so precise that it seemed to defy human limitation. The jars of tears became symbols of control, evidence that emotion could be catalogued, measured, and preserved, creating a chilling link between the executioner's obsession and the lives forever altered by his work. Scholars suggested the mansion's architecture was itself a tool, a mechanism designed to enhance perception, manipulate reactions, and guide victims through calculated spaces that amplified fear. Rumors claimed that footsteps echoed where none existed, shadows shifted independently, and subtle shifts in air pressure carried dread in measurable waves. Families adjusted routines unconsciously. Citizens avoided certain districts. Children slept with lanterns close. Merchants moved cautiously through streets, all evidence that the executioner's legacy endured. Even attempts to reconstruct his work produced fragmented results, as if the very methodology had been designed to resist full comprehension. Observers reported feelings of unease in spaces he once occupied, a residue of anticipation, a trace of control, a lingering signature of his presence. Every narrative, every whispered account reinforced the notion that fear had been mastered, that it could be collected, distilled, and used to exert power without visible force. Scholars examining the jars noted no chemical anomaly, yet witnesses insisted that they contained more than liquid. They contained the essence of terror itself, captured through means unknown and preserved beyond ordinary decay. Families living near the mansion reported recurrent disturbances, faint footsteps, flickering shadows, sudden chills, and glimpses of figures that vanished when approached. The executioner's influence became a study in permanence, demonstrating that the effects of terror, once properly orchestrated, could persist far beyond immediate events, influencing perception, memory, and behavior. Even decades later, individuals who encountered remnants of his work spoke of an intangible pressure, a sense that the house, the jars, and the records were alive with memory, observation, and emotion. No one could fully explain the methods, yet all agreed that the precision, patience, and obsessive attention to detail had created an enduring psychological imprint. Tokyo remained haunted not by visible monsters, but by the invisible orchestration of fear, the meticulous recording of reactions, and the enduring mystery of a man who had perfected the collection of tears. Families, scholars, and explorers all approached the remnants of his work with reverence and dread, aware that the legacy of meticulous terror could influence perception in ways that logic could not account for. The mansion, the jars, the journals, and the stories together formed a puzzle that resisted completion, a system of horror both elegant and terrifying, designed to endure long after the man himself vanished. Even today, the executioner's true capabilities, the exact methods he employed, and the ultimate scope of his work remain unknown, leaving a city, a culture, and a history forever marked by the meticulous collection of human fear. Shadows linger, silence persists, and whispers continue, as if Tokyo itself remembers the presence, the obsession, and the perfection of terror executed in a way that defies understanding, leaving an unsolved, haunting legacy. Time moved forward, but the memory of the executioner remained, etched into the consciousness of Tokyo. Shadows that once seemed ordinary now carried weight, subtle and oppressive, a reminder of mastery over fear. Families adjusted permanently, rituals forming unconsciously to avoid perceived threats, children learning instinctive caution, and merchants moving through streets as if under constant observation. The mansion, though abandoned, radiated influence, jars of tears still shimmering faintly, a testament to obsession and precision. Scholars, historians, and psychologists attempted to study the legacy, yet each investigation revealed only fragments, glimpses of genius interwoven with cruelty. Even the air in nearby alleys seemed charged, each breeze carrying echoes of whispers, sighs, and long-forgotten tears. Tokyo itself had been altered not by physical destruction, but by the invisible hand of terror, precise, patient, and meticulously orchestrated. Memories of victims persisted, their faces and reactions lingering in the minds of those who had witnessed even a fragment of the horror. Rumors became intertwined with reality, creating a cultural imprint that could not be erased. The executioner's work was not merely a sequence of acts. It was a systematic mastery of observation, anticipation, and collection of human emotion, culminating in a legacy that defied ordinary understanding. Each jar, each note, each recorded reaction stood as evidence that terror could be preserved, measured, and catalogued, a chilling proof of control over the intangible. Citizens avoided certain streets without conscious reasoning, their instincts attuned to the remnants of manipulation that lingered in the environment. Families whispered warnings. Children slept with lights, merchants carried charms, and even the most rational scholars admitted the impossibility of fully comprehending the psychological architecture he had constructed. The mansion, shadows, and jars persisted as reminders that fear, once perfected, could survive far beyond the life of the orchestrator. Observers noted subtle sensations, fleeting glimpses, and inexplicable responses when encountering remnants of the executioner's work, confirming that terror had been distilled into something almost tangible. Legends and documentation combined, reinforcing the notion that the man who collected tears had mastered an art beyond cruelty, transcending ordinary perception, and leaving a haunting impression that would persist indefinitely. The city's heartbeat seemed subtly altered, a rhythm dictated by caution, anticipation, and the memory of invisible mastery. Scholars who attempted to recreate his methods failed, each experiment revealing only the limitations of human understanding, the impossibility of replicating precision, patience, and psychological insight at such a level. Families, children, and merchants continued rituals shaped by instinctive fear, demonstrating the persistence of influence long after the executioner had vanished. The jars, the journals, and the mansion became cultural touchstones, both feared and studied, symbols of human fragility captured and preserved through obsession. Even the faintest flicker of light, each subtle sound, and every unexplained movement reminded citizens of the invisible dominion once exercised by one man. Stories of vanished neighbors, whispered cries, and lingering shadows persisted, ensuring that memory of the executioner's methods endured in both tangible and psychological forms. Attempts to rationalize, to categorize, or to understand the full scope of his work were met with frustration, as the precision of observation and orchestration defied conventional analysis. Every account, fragmented and inconsistent, contributed to the growing myth, yet each affirmed the terrifying truth. Fear had been mastered, captured and preserved in a way that survived time, distance, and explanation. The mansion, still standing as a silent witness, exuded the weight of collected sorrow, its jars reflecting candlelight and memory in equal measure, a chilling monument to the perfection of terror. Even visitors long after the fact spoke of unease, whispers, and visions, evidence that the legacy of meticulous fear collection persisted in ways both subtle and profound. The executioner's presence, though physically absent, remained a psychological constant, shaping behavior, perception, and culture, a ghostly dominion impervious to time. Families and citizens unknowingly participated in rituals born of anticipation, a city governed not by laws or rulers, but by the enduring influence of orchestrated fear, perfected decades before. The jars remained, the notes endured, and the mansion's architecture continued to shape responses, preserving the legacy of a man who had transcended execution to become an architect of terror itself. The executioner's shadow persisted long after the mansion fell silent. A specter of fear woven into the city's memory. Citizens moved with caution, their instincts forever shaped by invisible mastery, a subconscious acknowledgement of precision that could not be seen, but always felt. Families spoke in hushed tones about the lingering dread. Children hesitated at doorways and merchants altered paths, performing subtle rituals to maintain safety. Even scholars and historians, attempting to rationalize the events, found themselves unsettled, confronted with fragments that defied logic and explanation. The jars of tears remained faintly glimmering, a tangible record of suffering meticulously collected and preserved. Each one represented not merely emotion, but the power to influence, control, and manipulate beyond ordinary comprehension. Tales of impossible shadows, whispered cries, and sudden chills became embedded in culture, blending legend with history, each story reinforcing the presence that could never be fully understood. Explorers and thrill-seekers who dared enter the abandoned mansion recounted sensations impossible to describe. Walls that seemed to breathe, shadows that moved independently, the faint shimmer of captured fear lingering in the air. Tokyo itself had become a living testament to the executioner's mastery, a city whose streets, alleys, and buildings carried echoes of orchestrated terror, ensuring that even those removed from the events felt the impact. Scholars analyzed notes, jars, and anecdotal evidence. Yet no method could fully explain the precision, patience, and psychological insight involved. Even modern science struggled to quantify the manipulation of human emotion with such effectiveness, leaving the executioner's techniques as both inspiration and enigma. Families continued rituals born of instinctive fear, children carried subtle apprehension into adulthood, and merchants adapted routines learned through subtle cues, all reflecting the enduring influence of his work. The mansion stood as a monument, not merely to cruelty but to obsessive mastery over human perception, memory, and emotion. Each artifact, each record, each whisper of legend reinforced the legacy of one man whose understanding of terror transcended ordinary execution. Jars collected decades before remained potent symbols. Their contents still invoked unease, fascination, and dread. Visitors reported flashes of memory, unexplained sensations, and fleeting visions, evidence that fear had been distilled into a form that survived time, observation, and comprehension. Even with centuries passing, the executioner's psychological imprint shaped responses, habits, and cultural memory, a testament to the permanence of meticulously crafted horror. Historians attempting to separate myth from fact confronted the limitations of knowledge, as each record suggested not randomness, but deliberate, systematic orchestration of human emotion. Families, students, merchants, and guards continued patterns unconsciously, a network of anticipation, caution, and instinctive fear that traced back to his meticulous work. The mansion, jars, and notes became sacred and feared artifacts, studied for insight yet avoided for the weight of memory they carried. Shadows lingered longer than natural, silence carried echoes of screams, and ordinary spaces took on subtle, unnatural qualities, a testament to the lasting influence of observation and fear. Even the bravest hesitated in alleys once familiar, aware subconsciously of patterns they could not articulate, responding to the unseen architecture of terror he had left behind. The executioner's mastery elevated fear into permanence, transforming emotion into recorded, preserved, and influential entities. Every story, fragment, and artifact contributed to the legend, reinforcing the notion that some horrors exist not only in events, but in the structure of memory, observation, and psychological influence. Tokyo remained haunted, not by ghosts in the conventional sense, but by the enduring legacy of precision, obsession, and mastery over the most intimate of human vulnerabilities. The jars, journals, and memories preserved a man's perfection of terror, a chilling orchestration of control over perception and emotion that continues to shape culture, instinct, and memory. Even the faintest whisper or unexplained flicker of light recalls the executioner's presence, a reminder that terror, once mastered, can exist beyond time, beyond mortality, and beyond comprehension. Families, citizens, and scholars alike remain bound, knowingly or unknowingly, to the invisible architecture he left behind, a permanent imprint of fear perfected, preserved, and never forgotten. The executioner vanished physically, yet his work endures. An eternal testament to the art of horror, the power of obsession, and the haunting perfection of one man who collected tears, manipulated perception, and turned fear into immortality.